I'm Mark Correll, Chair of the Department of History at Spring Arbor University. This video is meant to help you succeed in your introductory college history course. Episode 1: The Purpose of Your History Course. Nearly every college in the country requires a history course for satisfaction of its bachelor degree requirements. Since every U.S. high schooler is also required to take multiple years of history and social studies in their schooling, most students expect their college courses to be more or less the same as their high school courses. This series of videos is meant as an introduction to the different way your college professors approach history to help you succeed at the college level. The greatest difference between high school and college comes from its distinct purposes. The purpose of a high school curriculum is to make pupils into good citizens. History is taught then as a series of individuals and events that either upheld or fell short of particular timeless virtues. Who determines these virtues? State school boards and state superintendents who are empowered by state legislatures. However, the particular virtues that are emphasized have a tendency to change over time. While probably every American student in the country today learns about Frederick Douglass, that was simply not the case 2 generations ago. The virtues of inclusion of African Americans is something that has been added to the other virtues praised by the American school systems. But I hope you see here the issue. Teaching virtues through history means teaching them as though they're timeless truths. So either Thomas Jefferson was for slavery or he wasn't. This means he becomes either a hero or a villain, and many people make their cases about which aspects of Jefferson to emphasize to grade schoolers to turn him either into a hero or a villain. A successful high school history pupil is one that is able to make a definitive statement about the past based on these timeless virtues. In college, the primary purpose of your history class is to see things as historical, that is, as being shaped by their particular era or time. Frankly, Thomas Jefferson, who certainly saw himself as a hero, would have not even understood the ways in which 21st century Americans paint him as a villain. Our contexts are fundamentally different. This is what is emphasized in a college classroom. Can you put people in their time frame? Generally speaking, your college professors will probably shy away from strong statements about the virtues of key figures in the past, unless they were somehow known for being particularly virtuous or contemptible in their own time period. That's why your professor is always smirking when they say that Maximilien Robespierre, architect of the French Revolution's terror, was known as the Incorruptible by his countrymen. So through these videos, I'm going to use a technique often used by college professors and teach through anecdotes. I'm an expert on modern Germany, so I'm going to draw my examples from European history. These are not the only examples that fit, but they're stories I like to tell. In the 11th century, the Holy Roman Emperor was the most important monarch in Christendom and was seen as morally responsible for governing Christians. The Pope was also both a religious and political figure who exercised considerable political authority over Rome and whose function was as the prime intermediary between the Church and Christ. So both Emperor and Pope had religious and political authority. Emperor Henry III, who ruled from 1046 to 1056, set out to use his power to reform the Church and free the papacy from control by local Roman lords. This led to a series of reforming popes who worked to rid the Church of many of its worst excesses. One of the greatest of these was Gregory VII. Gregory VII particularly wanted to be sure that the Church was appointing virtuous bishops, especially trying to stop the practice of simony, which was the buying and selling of church titles. Henry III, however, died at only 39 and left behind a child monarch, Henry IV, who was raised and guided by both church leaders and nobles at his court. As an adult, Henry IV wanted to assert his power as emperor, just as Gregory was asserting his power as pope. In 1075, this came to a head when both the emperor and the pope appointed competing figures to be Archbishop of Milan. The old archbishop had practiced simony and bought his title, but he was also a supporter of the emperor's political authority in Milan against the growing political power of the pope in the same area. The new archbishop, chosen by the old one, was also a supporter of imperial authority, but he also bought the title. The Pope therefore declared this succession illegitimate and invested his own supporter as Archbishop of Milan. So Milan had 2 archbishops, only one of whose sacraments would be fully effective, and this led to a crisis in the streets of Milan, as militias for the emperor, the Ghibellines, fought against supporters of the Pope, the Guelphs. The Holy Roman Emperor trusted in his superior military power to be able to wait out the Pope, but the Pope excommunicated the emperor, giving support to various rebel factions in the Holy Roman Empire as they fought to unseat the emperor. Eventually, the emperor, Henry IV, went with his wife and son chastened, and stood barefoot in the snow outside the Pope's mountain stronghold in Canossa for 3 days until Gregory VII finally relented, granting him absolution and allowing him full communion with the Church. This was the most dramatic episode of the investiture controversy, but it was not its end. Henry IV and Gregory VII continued to feud, and it would not be the last time that Henry IV was excommunicated. The legal issue was only resolved 50 years later, after the First Crusade, and the same issue would again become a major point of conflict in European politics in the 14th century. If this episode is taught at all in high school, it is likely portrayed as a dramatic moment where the combination of the church and the state leads to conflict. It points to the eventual success of the timeless virtue of separation of church and state. Most university professors who teach this will likely draw the opposite conclusions. They would point out that for the medieval European there was no clear distinction between religious and state authority. The church and the state were seen as an authoritative union, even when the common burghers still felt it necessary to join political and religious parties that fought in the streets. So the investiture controversy isn't important because it teaches us a lesson about ourselves. It is interesting because it shows a fascinating glimpse into the thoughts and worldview of the subjects. It does teach us about ourselves, but only to show us the ways in which our values are determined by our own context and how much that context can change over time.